And then if you want to go after somebody for infringement, you need to get a patent attorney. So that's that end of it. So I realized I could become a patent agent. So I took the patent bar, passed it, and then I started writing full applications for engineers and scientists at Gore. And I worked there for about 20 years and wrote a bunch of patents for their scientists. And then about 10, 11 years ago, I decided to go out on my own and start my own practice writing patents. And so for the last 10 years, I've written about almost, I'd say 900 plus patents on my docket. So it's a lot. And the allowance rate that's a metric of how effective a patent attorney or agent is at getting their patents allowed. And it's the percentage of patents that get issued that they file and prosecute through the patent office. And my allowance rate is over 80%. And the national average is around 50 typically, or sometimes less than 50. So I also would like to tell your listeners, if they're vetting someone to help them prepare and file a patent, they should ask them, what is their allowance rate?
Interesting. That's a pro tip. I love that.
Yeah.
Getting into, most of our listeners, watchers are in the e-com space. So, they might be looking at maybe a product that currently exists and then iterating on that, making some changes and things like that. But in your experience, what are some of the big struggles that brand owners face when they, first think about getting patents?
Well, to get something patented, you have to have something that's unique and something that's non-obvious. And so if it's a consumer product and it's very similar to other products, it may be difficult to kind of think about what would be the unique aspect of that. But, if you have even one minor improvement on an existing product, that improvement, if it's not obvious, can be the key basis for getting your patent allowed and issued. So that's really the main thing you need to think about is, what have I done to improve it? And is it significant? Like, sometimes people will say, well, I'm going to add a cup holder to whatever it is. I call it the proverbial cup holder. And I'm like, well, if that improvement doesn't really add a lot of advantages and, make the product better, that probably isn't going to help you get it allowed. It has to be an improvement that, makes it better.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So can you give me an example of, maybe something that you worked with in the past where there was a item that could be considered similar, but, they iterated on it or they got some kind of new spin on it to where they were able to then patent the product?
Well, most patents are improvement patents because, other than totally new materials or, coming up with a new element. I mean, everything is some combination of known materials that you're putting together in some unique way. Let me see here. So, we recently got a patent issued, and it's a people maybe have heard about the TheraCane, right? And that's a cane that you can use to rub on your back. And so the inventor that I worked with, they said, well, we want to have one with a handle on it so you can get better leverage. We want that handle to be adjustable along the length of the cane. So we prepared the patent application and we talked about how that handle was slidably attached, to the elongated portion of the TheraCane. I'm using patent language. But yeah, and so we were able to get it through. I mean, it took at least one office action and talking to the examiner in what's called a phone interview. But we talked about how that really made an improvement in the device because you can apply more pressure, at different points on the body because you have that adjustable position of the handle. So that's one example.
Awesome. So, say that, Joe's out in his garage, coming up with his next new invention, and he's got something kind of started to put together, but he wants to go share it. He wants to get, input from his neighbors or from people at work. When should somebody start really thinking about, patent or patent protections? At that point, should they be trying to go for a provisional patent to kind of shop the idea around? What would that look like in your mind?
Well, really, the US is under what's called first to file now, and that changed back in 2013. And so you really don't want to disclose your idea to anybody until, unless you have an agreement, a confidentiality agreement, until you get at least a provisional patent filed. And so really the first step, like when you start working on something, you think, oh, this is really cool. I think I might have an invention. Should I file a patent or what should I do? I would really encourage people to just first maybe go on Google and do a lot of searches for that product. And then if they're satisfied that they can't find anything like it, then call somebody like me to do a patent prior art search. Because there's lots of things in the patent literature and also in other databases that you might not be aware of by just doing a Google search. And so then if the patent agent or attorney doesn't find anything that looks similar, then I would say, yeah, go ahead and prepare provisional or regular patent or non-provisional and get it filed. But the cost, it's really an important step of due diligence to do the patent prior art search before you prepare a patent. And the cost of it, it's much, much less than preparing a patent application. So I think that's really a wise first step for anybody who thinks they have something that's unique and of value.
So
Awesome,
basically, they need to search and see. What I love to do, because I think people will go to like Google Patents, and if you aren't familiar with patent language, it's really hard to search for a similar product, right? Because in a utility patent, you're patenting the way that something is used or the way that it works. So it's not like if I'm searching, I create a new bottle with a new type of cap that's interesting and different than any other bottle on the market. I'm not going to be able to just search for bottle, right? I'm going to have to really search for the way that something works. So what I love to do is do like a Google search for similar products. And then I will see, like, go to their website and stuff and see if I can find any information. But do you have any tips, I guess, for amateurs when they're first doing that patent search? Because that's a question that I get all the time. Of course, I always tell them, like, search on your own, but then hire a patent attorney or a patent agent. I have 2 patent agents that I love. You and Don are like my 2 go-to patent agents. But the thing is, do you have any tips for we have a lot of brand owners and they're constantly bringing new things to market. And the other side of it is they're worried that something they're bringing to market infringes on someone's patent. So that's the reason they're doing a search.
Right.
So what's the easiest way or the most effective way for us without becoming patent agents ourselves to do a search like that?
Well, like you said, there's Google Patents. You can actually also use the USPTO, United States Patent and Trademark Office. They have a search database you can use. It's a little bit more clumsy than Google Patents, but I would really recommend using what's called freepatentsonline.com, because you can type in a couple of keywords, and they'll give you a list of patents that kind of match that keyword phrase. And then if you click on one and you think it's close, it'll then show you the ones underneath that were referenced when it was being prosecuted by a patent office. So you can then if you see one there that looks even closer, just click on it. And it's super user friendly and easy. And you can kind of progressively get closer and closer to your idea. And that's a good way, I think, for people to start. There's other ways you can do what's called assignee search. Like you said, you'll go and you look for similar products, you look at the companies. Somebody like me, I ask people before I do a search, do you know of anybody else who has something similar? What are the names of the companies? And I'll do assignee searches, looking for any patents that are assigned to those companies. And sometimes I do an assignee search and it's like 1,000, right? And I'm like, well, that's still too many to go through. Then I say, so in my search, I subscribe to a professional searcher database. But then I can do the assignee search, and then I can say, okay, now subset that by a particular class or subclass within the patent office, or I can say, or subdivide it or sub-search it by some keywords too. So it makes it easier for me to narrow in on things a lot quicker, having that database. But yeah, I'd say go to Free Patents Online, and if you are ambitious enough to try to do some other types of searching, You can search by assignee on the USPTO, and you can also search by class and subclass, because whenever patents are filed, they get put into a class and a subclass, and you can go onto the USPTO website and look at the classification descriptions, and you can search those, and you can kind of find some that are similarly describe your product, and then you can kind of totally scour those particular classes and subclasses. But that's, again, a little bit more work. So it gets
Got it.
fast, really, but
Right. So that's such a great tip to also look by classes, because then you're going to find multiple products that are similar to yours. Like, especially like if you're making dog toys, or you're making a type of a knife or something like that, like that's going to fall into that subclass, and you're going to be able to search. Or if you're making a kitchen container or something like that,
right.
It's all going to be there, and then you can kind of go through those and look at the drawings and get an idea. So let's talk about, this is always the scary part. People are like, okay, so I need to file my provisional so that I can get patent pending, and that buys me a year, right? But that's only for a utility patent. It's not for a design patent. We'll get into that in a minute, but but can we get into length of time? So, I have some patents that were good to go, especially design patents. They can be granted in as little as 6 months. And I have utility patents that have taken a lot longer, and I'm still fighting. So when it comes to timing, how long does it take to get a patent after filing the application, and what can be done during this period of time?
Well, you have options. If you file a provisional and don't do anything for a year, you've already set 1 year, of time. And then if you file a non-provisional and you just file it the regular way, it typically takes anywhere from, I'd say, 18 months to 2 years before you get your first office action. So if you did the provisional and then a non-provisional with regular filing, you're looking at 2.5 to 3 years before you get your first office action. So if that's not acceptable to you, there's other options. So one option is, don't wait, don't file a provisional at all, just file a regular non-provisional first, which will cut off a year. Or you can, if you file provisional, you might be spending a few more months, maybe 6 months, getting your concept really nailed down. Don't wait the full year. Go ahead and file 6 months after you file your provisional. A lot of people kind of just mindlessly say, okay, I filed my provisional, I'm going to wait the full year. But you don't have to. You can file it you can file a non-provisional the next day if you want to. Then there's other options. If, for example, one of the inventors is over the age of 65, you can get free accelerated examination based on age. So you can file it with that petition, and you're probably going to get an office action back within about 6 months to 8 months. Then there's also what's called a track one prioritized examination request. Now that costs some money. So if you want to file that with your non-provisional, it's going to be accelerated, just like I said, for the petition based on age, and you're going to get a feedback within about 6 months to 8 months. And the fee for that for a micro entity, I think is either 1,000 or 500. I get confused. Let me look it up. Yeah, it's actually 1,050. So the request for prioritized examination is 1,050. But then instead of waiting a year and a half to 2 years, you're going to get feedback in probably 6 months. And I've filed patents for people with the track one request, and I actually got a notice of allowance, I think like 6 weeks later. So I think that might be a record. I'd like to know what the record is, but that's super, super fast.
Yeah, that is pretty fast. So let's say that I go and we already talked about how to search by class, how to search by assignee, how to use free patents online, all of those resources. How do we know when we see a product that might be similar to ours? Do you have any tips? Like when I read patent language, it's really confusing. Do you have any tips for kind of deciphering whether or not you might be infringing on someone else's idea or someone else's patent with your idea or your differentiation of a product?
Okay. Yeah. So what you would do is say you find a patent that looks like it describes it's kind of similar to your product. Number one, what you want to do is determine whether or not that patent is actually active. So you can go to the United States Patent and Trademark Office and go to public pair and type in the patent number or the application number, and then it will show you, have they paid their maintenance fees? Is it an active patent? You know, a lot of patents are issued and they're granted, but then, you know, 3.5 to 4 years later, people don't pay the fees to maintain it, and it's actually abandoned. So if it's abandoned, and especially if it's been abandoned for quite some time, you can feel pretty comfortable that is now in the public domain. The owner of the patent can revive a patent if it's gone abandoned for failure to pay the maintenance fees. But, you know, if they haven't done it within a couple of years, they have to have a pretty darn good reason as to why they didn't pay the fees on time. So that's the first thing. Make sure it's actually active. Now, the other thing too is you probably, when you go on pair, you want to look at you know, cross references to see if there might be other patents that are in the patent family. Like, so when you file a patent, sometimes you get the first one issued, then you'll file a divisional or a continuation, or they may file what's called a continuation in part. So there could be, you know, a lot of patents that are very similar to the one that you're looking at, that, you know, that one you're looking at might be abandoned, but there might be other ones that aren't. So you really need to understand the entire patent family for that application. So then you can look at, for the patents that are active and issued, you can then go to the claims, and you want to look at the independent claims, and for you to infringe, you have to have each and every element listed in the claim, or really an equivalent thereof. So when you look at that, you basically read, say it has a handle, say for example, it's a cane, right? A therapeutic cane. So you would say it has, elongated straight portion, it has a curved portion. You say, yeah, my product has that. Does it have a handle? Yes, it has a handle, so for example, if my client with that therapeutic cane application found a patent that had the handle, but it wasn't slidably engaged, they would infringe because they have all the elements, but they have an additional feature. Their feature is that the handle is slidable. So they would be dominated by the other patent that talked about therapeutic cane with a handle that extends from the side, because they have all the same elements. So that's a big thing that you need to look into before you go to market, because if you spend a lot of money to make the product and marketing, all the other stuff that you spend money on, and then you find out, oh, well, I'm dominated by somebody else. As soon as you get out there in the public and start making money, or maybe even before, you're probably going to get a letter from those people saying, hey, that you're infringing our patent. You need to cease and desist. So again, to infringe, you have to have each and every element of the claim. So you have to just kind of methodically go through it. And some people do what's called a claim construction table, and they'll pull out each statement of the claim, and they'll kind of check it. Like, do we have that part? Okay, yes. Next one. Do we have that part? Check. Okay, we got it. So that's the exercise you have to go through.
Got it. So Andy, did you have a question? No. Okay.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. I thought I heard you say something, so I didn't want to interrupt you. So for example, with the cane products, the reason that your client was able to gain a patent for that is that they changed the handle on the product to actually function differently. So even though the product was essentially the same as the other patent, and they would have infringed on it had they just kept it the same, because they changed the handle and they were able to say ours functions differently. It's used in a slightly different way, in the way that it functions. So they were able to patent it because of that. So if I'm just recapping what you're saying about that, it's basically like, I need to read through the claims. I need to understand all the patents, because some strategies that big companies use, and even small companies use, like what I did with mine, when I'm waiting for my utility patent to get approved, I've filed multiple design patents so that at least I can protect each part of my product, because design patents get approved fairly quickly. So, what you're saying is you need to understand every part of that patent family, because Had they, you know, filed multiple patents on it that you didn't look at and you only looked at one, then you might be infringing on something and not realize it. And I agree with you completely. Like, you should do some searching on your own, but you should hire someone who understands how to look at that patent family and how to really understand what you're getting into, right?
You really should, yes.
And you're not just saying that because you sell services, right? Like, I mean, it is important. I'm sure you've seen a lot of people get into trouble, and you know that would be crazy, right? In terms of, if you do infringe on someone's patent, they can literally sue you for all the profits that you have gotten, and then damages and then some. So that would not be any fun.
Yeah, that would not be good. Yeah. So I do want to make sure that people understand that you can get a patent issued and granted on an improvement, but you can be dominated by somebody else's issued patent. So you can get a patent in your hand, like, hey, yeah, I got a patent on this improvement, but you actually are not allowed, if the company decides to send you a cease and desist letter, you're not allowed to actually make it and sell it. So that it's kind of weird. But
oh wow, so like your TheraCane guy with his slidable handle,
right.
If the original makers of the TheraCane would have said, like, no, this is all you did was change the handle,
right.
they could have said, no, you can't do this.
But that the particular references related to just the cane with a handle are old and they're expired, so that's okay. But if it had been an issued and active patent, that would be a case where they got the patent allowed because they improved it, but they're dominated by somebody else's issued and active patent. So,
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, can we talk a little bit about provisional patents? I think people are always confused by these because they're called patents, but they're not really patents, right? Like, no one's actually reviewing that. So can you tell us, what is a provisional patent and how can it be useful?
Well, a provisional patent is, really has, it's a patent application you file to set your priority date. So as I mentioned before, the U.S. is operating under first to file. And so if you have a great idea and you want to explore it more and you maybe want to talk to some people or whatever it might be, you might want to file this provisional patent to set your date of filing so that if anybody files after that date, you would be first to file and you would get the patent, over them. And so a provisional patent, really the requirements from the USPTO are very minor when it comes to what the provisional patent needs to look like. You can take a piece of paper, you can write down your concept and describe it as thoroughly as you can. You can sketch up, 2, 3, 4 figures and label them and send it in. And the fee is only $75. So they're not going to be making sure that you have proper claim language. They're not going to be making sure that your line drawings are proper in terms of clarity and you have everything numbered properly. Like I said, it's just a really great way for people to get something filed quickly to cover their idea. Now, with that being said, if you do file a 1-paragraph provisional patent with one little sketch and you wait a full year and then you go to file your non-provisional and you work with somebody like me who's going to write a real proper patent application, and we put together a 10-page application and 8 pages of figures, and we write up all the claims. Probably most of those claims that we file in that non-provisional a year later will not get the benefit back to your provisional, because the claims in that non-provisional to get the date back to the provisional have to be supported by whatever you said in that provisional, right? So if you don't say very much, you're not going to really support very many claims later.
Yeah, the way that my agent described it to me when I was originally filing mine was, we want to make the the provisional as strong as possible, because if someone else invented something in that time frame, right, as well, and then we're suddenly filing our non-provisional and all of our claims are perfect and they're different from what we originally filed, then they can go back and look at that and go, well, no, we have proof we invented this before, or we did this before. And so what we did was we tried to write as good of a provisional as we possibly could, where we could basically just make like a couple of tweaks and file a non-provisional.
That's exactly what I do. Yeah, so my fees for preparing a provisional are, the same as a non-provisional, but then when you get to the 1 year point for the non-provisional, it's just a really minor fee to review it and file it as a actual non-provisional. And the other thing too, like if you do a really, sparse provisional, you kind of feel like, oh, okay, I have it covered, but then you actually, and then you might get out in the public domain, you might be describing it, and you might be describing stuff that you really didn't even write in the provisional. So now you're publicly disclosing, alternative embodiments that you never even filed on. So, people get this sense of security by filing these really short provisionals. That's not a good idea.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And it makes sense why we would want to file them. And with the small fee and everything, it's just a great way to get that date stamp, so that when the patent examiner goes to actually review our non-provisional application, they can go back and look at that prior art. That's what I'm fighting right now, is all the prior art that is in, my industry and is around my product. My patent attorney is having to like go through and like adjust each claim just so, it's like, oh man. So whenever there's a lot of prior art, you want to get your stamp on it right away, get it in there, right? But it's a great way to do that. So can we talk about the difference between design and utility patents? Because many people fear utility patents because they take a long time, right? And they say, okay, I just want to get to market. And with the design patent, it can be approved pretty quickly. And, it's a cheaper process. It's not so involved. And so, what are the main differences? Why should we consider one or the other, and which one is stronger?
Okay. Well, a design patent is for the ornamental design of your product. And so it doesn't include function. It doesn't include what types of materials go into the product. It's really just for the shape of your product. And so a lot of people, when they want to design patent, like, they might want to say, well, I have magnets in mine. I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. Or, mine does this. I'm like, well, we can't put functional language in a design patent. A design patent is really just a series of figures of a single design, right? And it's just a description of those figures. And it has one claim, the ornamental design for the widget as shown in the figures. That's it. So they're pretty simple. That's why they're typically less costly, and they get examined more quickly. Now, when you do file a design patent, they are incredibly picky on the figures, because those figures have to show very clearly and definitely a particular design. So if there's variations between the figures, that's not going to fly. If they can't really determine the exact shape of that product, you say you only file 3 figures, you're probably not going to get the design patent through, because you can't tell the full shape of that product by 3 figures. So, design patents are great in certain situations, especially where the shape of the product, derives some benefit or is the valuable part of the product. So, for example, in my presentations, it's called a Rockabye Mousetrap. So it's a mousetrap. Typically it has a flat wood base, and then you have the spring and the lever and all that stuff. So in this particular design patent, they said, well, I'm going to make the base of my mousetrap curved. So when the mouse gets on it, it's going to start rocking back and forth, and they're going to be off balance, and it's going to make it more likely that they get slammed by the lever there. So, that design patent showed a mousetrap, the proverbial mousetrap is a patent, kind of icon, but it had a rounded, curved base. And so that was a great, so a design patent was a good option for that one. So
got it, because they didn't reinvent the function of the mousetrap.
No, right.
Well, kind of with the rockable base, but they basically, it's the same functionality. It's trapping a mouse, the same spring mechanism, all of that. But they changed the design of it so that it looks different and works different, and the shape of that mattered in the product design. So that's where a design patent was very strong for them. Is there an instance where a design patent is weak and people shouldn't consider using it?
If you have a really complicated, yeah, so that was a good one because it's pretty simple. And one other thing about design patents is you can show ancillary parts of the product in dashed lines in your design patent drawing, so that that's anything shown in evenly spaced dashed lines is not part of the claimed invention. And so whenever I do a design patent, I try to just take as much out and put it in dashed lines and just show the part that is providing the value. So in that case, like with that Mousetrap, I would really just show the base, kind of being curved, and then the rest of it I would kind of show in dashed lines because that part isn't really the design of that I'm concerned about. So a bad design patent is one that's a really, really complicated product with lots of different shapes and nooks and crannies, and because it's pretty easy to get around that design. If it's really complicated, and if the shape of it doesn't really give you any value, I'm not sure why you would do a design. So it's either
so if your competitor can just make a different shape, and the shape solves no function for the product,
right,
then if it solves a function, then it's going to be harder for a competitor to get around, because they're going to be like the rockabilly one. They wouldn't be able to just make it square, like a boat bottom or something, because it's the same design essentially, and it wouldn't do them any good. So I love that example. That's really awesome. So what about the time to file a patent? Is there any way, you mentioned a way to speed up the process? How do we do that?
Well, let me finish on what the difference between design.
Oh yeah, sorry.
That was just the first part. So then a utility is a much stronger patent. That was, I think, one of your questions, because a utility patent, you can show multiple embodiments in one patent filing, and you can talk about the functionality. The claim could be to a system, and you can talk about the components and how they interact, and those kind of the way they interact or the way they're configured with each other can be what makes it unique. You can have component A, B, and C, which is well known in the art, but if you configure them a unique way and you describe that in your claim, you can get that allowed. So a utility patent can be for the article. It can describe the article itself, kind of physically. It can be like a system. You can talk about the physical components and how they interact. It can be to a process of how you make something, or it can be to a method of using something. So there's a lot more options in a utility patent, because you can incorporate all those claims if you want. You can describe it different ways. And so, a utility patent is determined, infringement that is determined by reading the claim and determining whether or not you have each of those elements like we just talked about. So they're much broader and stronger in terms of enforcement than a design patent, right? So, so your next question was, how do we speed things up at the patent office? Well, you can be over 65.
Oh, so old people get pressed. Did you hear that, Andy? We were just talking about getting old. This is great.
Ageism. No, you know what? They deserve it. And honestly, you could just partner. Like, I'll call my dad and say, "Hey, Dad, you want to be on my patent?"
Well, you could try that. Let's do that. I did have a client do that one time and say, "Well, I just want to add my dad to it." I'm like, "Well, was he an inventor?" And they said, "No, but he's over 65." I said, "Well, you can't do that." So. Yeah, your inventorship has to be.
I always like looking for the hacks.
Right.
So you can be 65, and what else?
You can do the track one prioritized examination request. That's $1,050 extra as a micro. Or another option is if you're going to file it internationally, you can file a PCT application first, which stands for the Paris Convention Treaty, or Patent Cooperation Treaty. And so what a PCT is, it gives you a ticket to file internationally for up to 30 months from the filing date, your earliest filing date. So say you filed the PCT application first, you'd have 30 months from that standpoint to file in the US or Europe or Canada, wherever else you want to file. But, if you do file that first, they do what's called an international search and a written opinion on patentability. And they usually do that within 6 months. So
yes, they're fast. They can sometimes help you, right?
if they can help you a lot, because if you get your written opinion back and they say, hey, we find all claims to meet the requirements for patentability, which is novel, useful, and not obvious, then you can file it in the US with what's called a patent prosecution highway petition, PPH petition. And basically what you do with that petition is you say, hey, the PCT examining authority, in the written opinion said, we think this meets requirements for patentability. So why don't you just allow it too? Basically what you're saying. And so they will examine it in an accelerated fashion in the US, and that PPH program is available in lots of other countries. And then you're much more likely to get an office action really quickly, and a much higher percentage of patents that are filed with a PPH petition are allowed versus the standard less than or around 50% being allowed. So that's another good option. It's a little bit more complicated, but if you definitely are going to file, if you have a product that you definitely want some sort of international patent filings, you might want to do the PCT first, because then you're going to learn something right off the bat, and then you can use that to your advantage in terms of filing back into the US. So I always recommend that for people.
And it also still holds your date too, right? It's still like a filing date thing. And then you've got that 30 months, and then you still have to file within that 30 months. You still have to file in whatever countries you're going to sell in.
That's
right? Whatever countries you plan to, usually it's like import and export countries are really good to file in. And those are going to incur additional costs, and they may have additional filing requirements, but it's a really good option. So cool. What about products? So we talked about some of the different costs. There's various costs, there's various options. And some ways to speed up the process, some different considerations. What about products that cannot be patented? What can't be patented? You have some examples to give us of like what we should not even be thinking about patenting?
Yeah, well, there were some changes in the interpretation of patent law not too long ago. There was a Supreme Court case, Alice versus CLS Bank, and it was a patent, there was a litigation situation around the case. The patent dealt with transfer of funds and things of that nature. So the Supreme Court ended up reviewing this case, and they said, well, we don't think there's any infringement here because we don't even think this is patentable subject matter. You're just talking about transactions and moving things around on a computer. And they wrote up their opinions, and it created this like bomb at the USPTO, because then all of a sudden it's like, well, software generically is not patentable. And at that time, there were lots and lots of app patents. People had these different apps that they want to patent. And for the most part, apps are no longer patentable because if you have a software that deals with, taking in some input through the computer interface, it regurgitates it somehow and spits something else out to you, that is not patentable. That is just algorithms that modify input data. That is not patentable.
As a creator of software, I'm not happy about that.
Yeah, right.
I think there should be a special class. I think there should be a third class of patents. This is just my personal opinion, because these days, exactly like you're saying, is that changed the game in terms of, if I come out with something innovative in terms of on the software front, somebody can just go, oh, cool. I'm going to pretty much either copy it verbatim, write it with my own code, of course, but copy it verbatim, or just steal the idea. So anyway, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, you're right. It really actually was a big problem for people. And I had clients in the situation where I had filed the patents for them on these basically algorithms and computer software type concepts prior to this ruling. And then I had to tell them, well, things changed. Now it's not patentable. So it was really tough for people in my industry trying to explain it to people who didn't understand. But it's also kind of weird for people who did have issued patents prior to this. And then now they're like, well, if I assert it against somebody, they're just going to take me to the PTAB and say, well, it's it's not patentable, so you can't sue me for it anymore. So it's really a weird situation. And this ruling happened back in 2000. And so they're still trying to kind of get the USPTO is trying to get their heads around, how, what aspects of computer software are patentable and what aren't. So I can tell you just from my experience, if you have a computer software related concept, if it interfaces with something physical, say, a sensor, or in some cases, even GPS monitoring can be considered a physical thing that's moving around that can make it patentable. But say it interfaces with a sensor on a process line, and then your software adjusts something in the process line, then that certainly is still patentable, because you still have physical components that are outside of the abstract convention. And so also, if you have software that improves the computer itself, like if it's what's the term for that? It's you would know as a software developer, it's code, like
or say that again.
What would the software that runs the computer, what's that called? That if it's really
the operating system, or the boot.
Yeah. So operating system software that makes it run faster, or provide some sort of new functionality to the computer in terms of what it can do, that's also definitely still patentable. But it's it's all these apps where you just are bringing in data, and spitting something out to somebody on the screen. That's unfortunately not patentable as of now. It could change, not now.
That is frustrating, because that's one of the biggest thing in our inventor circles that we get, is always, oh, I've got this software, I've got this, and it's like, oh man, sorry.
Right.
But the cool thing is with software, if you are offering a really unique service or something, you can at least protect your code, and it's a great way at least to be able to protect your code and still bring something to market. Where if you make a product and you put it out there, it's much easier to reverse engineer, right? Although there's ways for software as well. But so I think we've covered just about everything. We have picked your brain for just about everything here. But I have one more question before Andy takes back over here. When we have a patent pending status, right? So we filed our provisional and we get the notice that it's been filed, and now we're patent pending. Like, what can we do with that? What have you seen people do with that? How do they use that status?
Well, with patent pending, there are requirements from the patent office to put people on notice that you're patent pending, and then once your patent gets issued, to put the public on notice that your product is patented. And if you don't do that, then you can lose rights to some of your damages, because if people don't know that they're infringing, and then how can you say, hey, well, pay me my money for infringing if you didn't go through the steps to inform them. And so with patent pending, you have a priority date set, and as long as you then later file, the proper patents, non-provisionals, or PCTs, or whatever it might be, within the right time frame, that priority date doesn't change. So whatever made you patent pending, if somebody filed on that same thing later, you're good. So that's what patent pending does. It also, and some of my clients have products that are, they're kind of Me Too-ish, I hate to say it. And so, I'm very straightforward with people. I'm like, the likelihood of you getting a patent on this is very small, very low. And they're like, well, I still want to be patent pending. I'm like, well, then you can file and be patent pending. And in this case, you may want to be patent pending for as long as possible, so that it's a deterrent to competitors from, knocking off your product. And so in those cases, instead of trying to accelerate it, we might want to delay it. So file it as a provisional, wait the full year, then file it as a regular application. And then once you get to examination, which is going to be 2.5 years to 3 years from the date of filing the provisional, that whole prosecution period can be drug out really as long as you want. So you can be patent pending for a long, long time. And maybe that's enough time for you to get out and make a name for yourself in the marketplace and deter competitors from trying to infringe. So that's what patent pending does. Yeah.
Love it. That's an interesting use case that I've never heard of before. That's awesome. Going back to the international patents. So I know myself who I have some inventions. I have some CAD designs. I haven't quite gotten to the point where I'm bringing it to market yet. But one of the biggest worries I know for me, and I'm sure for most people listening to this podcast who have some type of, patentable or possibly patentable product, the biggest worry is that, you somehow publish it or it gets out and then, somebody in China knocks it off immediately and starts producing it. So can you explain a little bit? I know that like in the US, you have the provisional patent, but I know that in some countries, and I believe China, Germany, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but once that product is displayed anywhere, even if you have a patent in the US and you don't have one in those countries, that now it's pretty much open game. I know that I've heard that a lot of people are going direct to China now and getting a patent there because you can get it fairly quickly and cheaply. And then I've also heard Germany is kind of like a hack to get a patent within like 6 months. I guess their patent system moves a lot faster than ours. How does that work? And, any intricacies there or any kind of hacks that you can use to make sure that, the Chinese manufacturers don't see the product and just knock it off immediately?
Well, first of all, I want to comment on what you said about filing in foreign countries if you publicly disclose it. If you publicly disclose your invention prior to filing, in the U.S., you still have 1 year to file, even if it's been publicly disclosed. The problem is, if you publicly disclose it, and then somebody else sees your blog or whatever it is you posted online, they can file it, and there's no way for you to track and show that they derive that from seeing your posting. And so, if you file after they do, you're going to be second to file. You're not going to get the patent. So that it's really not a good idea to publicly disclose before you file, but you can publicly disclose and you still have 1 year to file in the US. And that's, but it's not, I don't advise it. And other countries, Europe and most other countries have what's called an absolute novelty requirement, which means if you publicly disclosed it, you have just waived your rights to file a patent. So if you have a great idea that you think you might down the road want some sort of international patent filings, do not publicly disclose it until you file at least provisional. Yeah. And so, and then your other question, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Continue.
Yeah. And I think your other question was about filing in foreign countries. My experience with China is that, it's not that quick because a lot of these foreign countries, you can file a patent and then you can up to 5 years, you can request examination. So if you request examination really quickly, you're right, it's going to be processed pretty quickly. But most of my clients kind of wait a normal amount of time, which I think it ends up being 2 or 3 years from the date of filing in China, because they're really most concerned about the US and they're not wanting to incur additional expenses before they need to in those foreign countries, and they're patent pending in those countries. So, it's still something that should and hopefully will turn into a patent. One other thing I did want to mention too is you can file a patent in the US and file a non-publication request so that it never publishes unless it issues as a patent. And so if you want to be patent pending, but you don't want people to know about your invention, that's an option. And so you could be patent pending for 3-5 years, and you're legally labeling your product as patent pending because it is pending, but nobody can see it. It's not a publicly disclosed document. So, but if you're going to do a non-disclose request for non-publication, you can't file it internationally. So that's the rule. If you want to file in the US only, you can do the non-publication request. But then, if you do decide later, that you want to file a PCT within a year, you got to rescind that non-publication request. So
interesting. So in this case, all around, if you out of the gate, if you think that you're going to go international, you need that international protection, then the PCT is definitely the way to go. It sounds like just from the get-go.
Yeah. Well, you can, yeah, and I do think that's the way to go in most situations. You can file provisional first, and then 1 year file PCT. A lot of people do that too. But yeah, I'm with you. I like filing the PCT straight away if their product's pretty well developed and they know they want international protection. Then yeah, go right ahead and do the PCT. Right.
One other quick thing that I'm interested in is because my product, one of my products falls into this category where, somebody takes a product that's, is used for, so maybe I'm just going to throw something out here, even though it won't make sense, but like, a lawnmower, right? Somebody says, oh, a lawnmower's cool, but, I'm going to edit it and put a fan on it instead of a blade. It's going to look a little bit different, and it's going to be a street cleaner, right? It's going to blow dust off the street or something like that. How does that work in terms of, because it's a different, does a change in use case give you a better chance of getting a patent?
Well, sometimes like a method of use claim, if you're using something that's very conventional, but the use is really unique, in that case, you're creating air movement, and maybe that is really unique. But when you're like, wow, we're taking this thing and flipping it upside down, and it works great as this other device. That's when you might think, hey, method of using here might be the way to go, because from an article standpoint, it's kind of the same, or exactly the same components maybe, and arranged the same way. The way it's made is the same. So that's really your kind of final option. In some cases too, you may have developed a unique article, and also it's kind of a totally unique new product that the use has never been done before, right? So in that situation, you'd want to file both an article claim or system claim, and then also a method of use claim, because when you do a method of using claim, you can, there's something about getting royalties sooner, because you don't have to put the public on notice, because a method claim, you can't put a label on it. So, if you're really interested in getting, as many dollars as you can from infringers, method of use is also a good idea for that reason.
Awesome. Super interesting. Well, I know I learned a lot today. Amy, anything else that you wanted to ask Alex before we go?
No, I think I learned a lot too. And hopefully this really helps folks search for patents, understand what to do, understand the difference and the benefits of using a patent agent and a patent attorney, and especially know when to ask for help, because that's like always the worst part, is understanding when to invest and ask for that help. So I think you've answered all those questions for us today, Alex, and we thank you so much for being here.
Great. Hey, thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Hey, Alex, one last thing before you go. We always like to ask this. Are you, if you're one of those people who likes to read business books or even inspirational self-help, anything like that, are you, is there anything you're into right now in that realm? Any podcasts, anything you're listening to right now?
I read so much. As soon as I get away from the computer, I go mountain biking.
All right. I like that. Good enough. So let people know, let people know how they can find you, Alex.
My website is inventiontopatent.com with hyphens between it. And I don't know if you posted up there, but if you put invention to patent into Google, it should be on the first page or second page. And then my email address and my phone number are on there too. So you just pop in the, get to the website, and then you can reach me that way. Or I can give my number if you like to.
Well, that's up to you. You might get calls at 3 a.m. because from the international audience.
Oh, well, I do have it's 800-634-0605 if people have questions.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much, Alex. Really appreciate it. Everybody who's joined us live, as usual, thank you guys so much in the Zoom meeting. If you haven't joined us yet, please do so every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific. We record this with a live audience. Sellerroundtable.com/live. If you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, please do so. If you have the time, please leave a star rating and a review. We really appreciate it. Even if you say we suck, we love that feedback. Reach out anytime to Amy or I if you guys have any suggestions on what you want us to cover. We'd love to hear from you guys because we want to get you guys the content that you want to hear. And as usual, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time on the Seller Roundtable. Recording is stopped, and everybody in the stream, we're going away. But if you join us live here in the Zoom meeting, we usually do a few extra minutes with our guests to get kind of some inside Q&A. If you want to, you can jump in quickly, sellerroundtable.com/live. If not,